I have taken to calling my Saturday morning yoga class Kamikaze Yoga. I have a teacher who's very zealous. She makes us go in and out of poses so rapidly that I can't keep track of where or what I need to be doing. And she's a stickler for form, too. But a few weeks ago, when I came into class, she seemed to be a little bit off her game. She mentioned something at the beginning of the class about how she had to put her mother in a nursing home. And then later, as we were having our class, she kept getting our left side confused with our right as we were working on those poses. Near the end of the class, she mentioned again that she was upset about her mother, and she made a comment as we were leaving that she was afraid because her mother was in a nursing home in the middle of nowhere in central Michigan. I was walking out, and as she said that, I drew a little bit nearer along with some of the other classmates, and I listened to her a little more. And when she and I made eye contact, I said to her, "Your mother is going to be all right." And I had that feeling, you have sometimes when you make eye contact with someone and you know that the message that you are saying to them, that they've connected with you. It's a wonderful feeling. And I was happy when I walked out of the class thinking perhaps she might be feeling a little bit better. Well, today we are going to hear a passage from 2 Corinthians where Paul describes how when we gaze at Christ, we are transformed from one glory to the next, that it is like looking at the glory of God through a mirror, and our faces shine and our hearts are warmed because we're gazing at Christ. And when we gaze at Christ, we gaze at God. So listen with me to his words. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, starting with verse 7. Now, if the ministry of death, chiseled in letters on stone tablets, came in glory so that the people of Israel could not gaze at Moses' face because of the glory of his face, a glory now set aside, how much more will the ministry of the Spirit come in glory? For if there was glory in the ministry of condemnation, much more does the ministry of justification abound in glory. Indeed, what once had glory has lost its glory because of the greater glory. For if what was set aside came through glory, much more has the permanent come in glory. Since then, we have such hope. We act with great boldness, not like Moses, who put a veil over his face to keep the people of Israel from gazing at the end of the glory that was being set aside. But their minds were hardened. Indeed, to this very day, when they hear the reading of the Old Covenant, that same veil is still there, since only in Christ is it set aside. Indeed, to this very day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their minds. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And all of us, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. For much of my life, I have had great difficulty making eye contact. I didn't realize this was a problem for me until I went to college. And when I was in the college dorm, and I spoke to my friends there in the dorm, I would, instead of looking into their eyes, I would look up. And so they nicknamed me Lunar, because they thought that I was looking up at something maybe in the sky, like the stars or the moon. I couldn't look at them face to face. I forgot about that problem until I got to Lutheran General Hospital, and some of the quality projects that I was working on in those days started gaining national attention. And so then there were people coming in to interview me. And guess what? I did not look into the eyes of the interviewer. So they had to call in a media consultant to help me, putting a camera right in front of me, having an interviewer there, and I still couldn't do it. It was so out of reach for me that finally my media consultant told me to look at the person's left ear. By the way, if you have any trouble making eye contact, this really works. Looking at the person's left ear. It may not give you the satisfaction of looking into their eyes, but it will cause you to make eye contact, and then people will connect with you in an easier way. Well, we're hearing today 3 stories about looking, stories about gazing. Our first story is from the gospel. And in the gospel story, we join Peter, James, and John as they go up the mountain, and they are standing there when Jesus is transfigured before their eyes. He becomes so bright that they can barely look upon him. And they have to hide their eyes from him. He is full of light. This appearance of Jesus with that divine light was given to them before they had to walk down the mountain and then journey all the way to Jerusalem, where Jesus died, perhaps to help them through that journey so they could see what was inside Jesus, if only for a moment. Then we hear a story about Moses. When the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea and they went into the Promised Land, God would appear to Moses in a tent, and it was called the tent of meeting. So when Moses would go in the tent to talk to God, in the presence of God, all of that light of God would rest upon Moses' face. So when he came out to talk to the people, his face was glowing so much he had to hide it with a veil so the people could look at him. And in our third story from Corinthians, we hear from Paul that now that God has come to us in human form in Jesus Christ, when we look at Jesus, we are gazing at God's glory. And Paul goes on to say that when we gaze at God's glory through Jesus Christ, we begin to be glorious too. Our faces begin to shine, and we are transformed by that glory. And from glory into glory, more and more do we start to reflect God's glory in our face. Isn't that wonderful? Well, I was, since I have had so much difficulty with eye contact, I've studied it. I've wanted to know more about it. And through the years now, I am able to make eye contact. And I have to say to you that was one of the biggest revelations of my life, was to be able to look at people eye to eye. I found out that babies, when they're very first born and you're holding them in your arms, we are all born with the desire to see the pattern of a human face. Babies will look around all over a room until they see a pattern. And when they are very small in their mother's arms, they see that pattern in her eyes, in her face, because they can only see things that are between 8 and 15 inches away from them. And that's the perfect amount of space. So when a baby gazes at a mother's face that is so welcoming and loving, that baby is getting an invitation to the whole world. And our own instinct, when we see a baby, what do we want to do? We want to smile. We want to engage with a baby. Our own instinct to smile is probably part of the survival instinct of the human species. Because babies are seeking that, and we are giving that, then we are ensuring that our species will continue generation upon generation. That's how important gazing is into the eyes of another person, no matter how young or how old they might be. Well, that gazing is something that God does for us. I heard in a Sunday school class this morning, I was asked where God is and how, it was a very wonderful conversation. And I forgot to mention when that question was asked that God, one thing I know about God is always gazing at us. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. God's gazing at us all the time. And what is that gaze communicating? I see you. I see you, and you are good. That is God's gaze upon us, God's glory upon us. And that is another reason why we need to take time to gaze into one another's eyes, to communicate that love that is within us. You see, the things that we gaze at transform us. That is what our scripture teaches us today. So I am concerned that we aren't gazing at one another enough these days. This is a very deep concern in my heart. I notice that the things we gaze at are often screens. Remember, what you gaze at is what you will begin to look like over time. And because we gaze at screens instead of faces, over time, we lose those precious connections that can only be made face to face. I learned not long ago that in junior high and high school, students will break up with each other if they've been having a relationship or going steady, as they called it in my day. If they decided they didn't want to go steady anymore, they don't go to each other after classes are over and talk face to face. They sit in their classrooms with their cell phones underneath their desks often, and they text each other. And that's how it ends, through a text. It's too hard to be face to face, to say to the other person those painful words. And yet, face to face is what we are designed for, how God has designed us. We are designed to make human contact. We hunger for it. But now, in every empty moment of our lives, when we're between one thing and another, what do? Do we gaze into the eyes of someone we love who might be sitting right next to us? Or do we pull out a screen and tell ourselves we can get some work done, go on our Facebook page? This is what concerns me. Because we have been made by God, and what we look at is what we become. I'm concerned that when we don't look at one another, we are not communicating the love and grace that is in our hearts. And so there is such a terrible need for it in our world. And it's not happening as much as it used to. Imagine what would happen in our world if enemies gazed lovingly at one another. It would be interesting, wouldn't it? Instead of texting or sending email or posting, they looked at one another. A lot can happen when that happens. This is why I urge you, as one who has not been able to do eye contact for much of my life, I urge you to pour yourself into it every day. Because it's a gift that you can give no matter where you are. You can give it in any circumstance. And the more you give it, the more your life opens up to that other person, and their life will open up to you. It's a gift that keeps on giving. You know, one of the things I really enjoy is looking at photographs. You all might enjoy this too. Looking at photographs of people over a long period of years. So maybe you've seen photographs of yourself when you were really, really little, and then a little older, and then a little older, and then where you are today. Have you ever noticed that your face changes over time? Sometimes just because we're growing older, but you can look at the face of a person over a span of many years, and you can see the life experiences that person has had written on their face, even at the time when those experiences occurred. Our lives are written here. What we gaze at is what we become. And the persons that we gaze at are open to new life and God's glory when we give them a loving look, because that is what God designed us for. So let's do this. Let's gaze with love and share God's glory through our eyes and our faces with everyone in the world.